All right, now are we good? We good? Yeah. Okay. If we can reconvene our meeting to open session, the board has been in executive session since 6 o'clock to discuss the superintendent evaluation and to discuss a personnel matter. We could all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We could have introductions.
Dave Hurst.
Willow Bear.
Jonathan Fishbein.
Meredith Moriarty.
Jody Monroe.
Holly Dellenbaugh.
Christine Beck.
Catherine Nadeau.
Wendy Sampson.
And Judy Kehoe.
First up is the approval of minutes. It is recommended that the Board of Education approve the minutes from the April 6th, 2022 regular board meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? That passes. Next, our meeting reports, and first is our superintendent's report.
Thank you. I'd like to highlight one of our students that we shared out, I think, earlier today. Our junior, Elena McGrath, is in Syracuse competing in New York State Skills USA competition in cosmetology at the New York State Fairgrounds. McGrath has earned the trip to the state level competition because she placed first at the regional skills event. She is a student studying cosmetology at CTE at the Cap Region BOCES, and she's going to be competing against other regional winners from across the state. So I'd like to wish her the best of luck. So congratulations. I think that's the first time we've actually had a student go and compete at that, so it's
That's
exciting.
great.
Yes.
That's awesome.
Also, our school this was released today as well, was ranked #1 by U.S. News and World Reports in the Albany metro area. We also, the high school was ranked 795. It increased from 901 since 2021. So, we all see rankings all the time, but I really just want to thank all of our staff, K-12, as well as our students and community for the support and hard work that allows Bethlehem to continue to be a top-ranked school district. So I'd like to congratulate everyone. And finally, I'm going to turn it over to Judy Kehoe, who wanted to talk about some tax rate information. We've got a few slides to share, so she's going to come up and present that to the board. Yes. It's in the shared drive. It is shared with you? Yeah.
So many presentations. Well, this is an unplanned budget presentation tonight, so I thought you couldn't get enough of the topic of budgets. So since our last meeting, we're getting ready to release the Highlights Budget newsletter, which goes out to all of the households. And this is when we start to get the preliminary assessment information from the towns of Bethlehem and New Scotland, and we calculate those early rates so that we can publish them. And there were a few things that had changed since the last year relative to the assessment, so I just wanted to take a quick minute and run through that for you. So on the next slide, we, of course, have our tax levy that we adopted, which is unchanged from the prior year. So there isn't a dollar more coming to the school district. When we talk about the tax cap, although we could have increased the levy, we didn't need to because of the inflow of state aid. So the last piece of these calculations relates to the tax rate, and the rate is used to divide up that levy between all of the taxpayers within those two communities. So on the next slide, we had some significant changes in the underlying assessed values in the town of Bethlehem. They went up approximately $27 million in assessments, which isn't atypical for Bethlehem. They tend to have some fairly steady increases from one year to the next. What was different this year is that the New Scotland valuation actually went down. And the reason for this, when I checked with the town of New Scotland's assessor, is part of their assessment base includes utility valuations, and they have the National Grid electric and gas lines included within their assessment base. Those values, because they're specialty properties, are not set by the local assessors. Those are set by New York State. So last year, New York State had boosted the values of those utilities by about 11%, and they made a correction apparently this year and lowered it by 16%. So that was about a $640,000 reduction in assessments that were attributable to that specialty utility property. If you look to the other parcels within the community, there was an increase there. So the net reduction is the $463,000. So why that is important and how that affects the tax rate is you essentially have fewer assessment dollars in the town of New Scotland that are sharing in the same tax levy amount. For Bethlehem, it's the opposite. You have far more parcels or dollar values in the assessments that all share in that same tax levy. So that is going to cause a variation in the tax rates between Bethlehem and New Scotland. We actually had a rate decrease of 2.3% in New Scotland last year, so unfortunately the pendulum is kind of swinging the other way for them this year based on the change in those valuations. So the preliminary calculations on the next slide show that there's actually a rate decrease of 1.10% for Bethlehem residents based on the increase in the assessments. For the town of New Scotland, it's a 2.75% increase in their rates. And again, that's because there are fewer parcels sharing in that. The other changes that also affected the rate calculations is a reflection of what we've all been hearing about, and what was just in the spotlight today is the incredible increase in values of homes. What that means is if the towns do not do reassessments, the values that a home is listed on the assessment rolls is in fact lower than the worth of those homes. The equalization rates are used to help adjust for that when you have two different communities within the same school district. So the good news, at least on the EQ rates, even though they changed pretty significantly from last year, they both moved in the same direction and close to the same percentage amount. So Bethlehem's went down 7% and New Scotland's went down 10%. So that means that for Bethlehem, for a $250,000 home, they'll probably see close to a $59 decrease in their tax bill. But for residents of New Scotland, it's going to go up about $151 for a $250,000 home. Down $125 last year, and again, they're going up this year, largely driven by that valuation on the National Grid parcels. On the next slide, just a quick recap of why we have these equalization rates. Again, because all of these parcels within the school district are split between Bethlehem and New Scotland, if the homes are assessed differently from one community to the other, if we don't adjust for that with the equalization rates, it means that the individual homeowners who might have an identical home, just one on one side of the boundary line and the other on the opposite side, they wouldn't be sharing equitably in the distribution of the tax levy. So while it would appear that New Scotland has a higher rate, and in fact they do have a higher rate, that's because the values of their homes are lower when compared to the market values of the Bethlehem homes. So this just shows you that, in fact, if you adjust for the equalization rates for a home that's valued at the same amount, $250,000, you do end up paying the same in taxes. That's converted or adjusted within the actual rates. If you go to the next slide, you can also see this is nothing new for each of the communities with the different rates, regardless of which way the levy is going, depending on those underlying changes in the assessed values. Some years represented in green, there are increases in the rates, and then the red represents years where we've had a decrease, and you see they don't always align the same between the different communities. The only time that you would get to a position where you have the same tax rates in both communities would be a time when the equalization rate stayed the same for both communities over at least a 2-year period. So the odds of that happening are highly unlikely. I think it's happened only once in my time here in the district, and it's all driven by the changes in these equalization rates and the overall assessment levels. So that's the quick overview. I don't know if you have any questions. I will cover tax rates again as we get close to setting the final tax rates. These are the preliminary numbers, and they will change between now and August when we set the final rates. Okay. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Judy. So we just wanted to give everyone, as Judy said, some preliminary information about that. So that concludes my superintendent's report for this evening.
Anybody have any questions for Jody? Next is our board report. First, I just wanted to thank all of our administrative professionals throughout the district. Today is Administrative Professionals Recognition Day, so thank you to everybody in all of the different buildings for all of your hard work. I would also like to recognize the cast and crew and directors of Les Mis that was here at the high school just after our last meeting. I know I think everyone did a terrific job, and there was a tremendous amount of work that was put into it. And I would particularly like to thank the directors, Amy Roos and Jason Dashew, Lindsay Dashew, and Michael O'Keefe, who handled all of everything, technical and music and choreography and all of it. But it was great, and it was really, really nice to have a community event again at the high school and to be in our new auditorium. And lastly, I just wanted to make sure everybody saw the email that came from NYSBA with the resolutions kit, where they are, if you are interested in submitting a resolution to be considered at the annual meeting in the fall. The deadline, I don't think, is until August, but the email did come in sometime in the last couple weeks, so just make sure you have it. If you don't, let me know and I can forward it to you. Anybody have anything else they would like to add?
I do. First, I did get to see Les Mis. It was wonderful. We went Saturday night. I do have a concern, and that is about the mics. They kept crackling and going in and out. I spoke to the young man who was on the soundboard. He told me he was new, but that didn't explain the crackling. And we spent all this money on a new auditorium and new audio system. And I don't know if anyone had a different experience on the night they went. But the night we went, the mics were crackling. I will attribute to the fact he said he was new and really wasn't as familiar as he wanted to be on the soundboard with the fact that sometimes the student was, who had the mic on, was not, their volume was not increased at the appropriate time. But the crackling is what I'm really concerned about.
I was
So-
there Thursday, and that didn't happen.
I was there 2 nights, Friday and Saturday, and it did, but part of it, I talked to Mike O'Keefe about it, and what
Okay.
he indicated is some of the students didn't do mic checks sufficiently. So if they're not
Okay.
placed correctly and they move a certain way, you're going to get that feedback. So I
Well, it
think
wasn't
it's.
feedback, it was really crackling. And,
But it could be from the mic shifting. So I
Okay.
think they need to do more testing with that and the placement. I mean, it's only the second time I think they've used them since they've been installed, and it might be like just
I'm
a
just
learning curve.
bringing it to
Yeah.
your attention because it's something that we don't want to continue.
Right.
It was very,
Yeah.
to concur with John, it was very noticeable Saturday night and a little bit on Friday, but not, I mean, nothing that it was taking away from the
Right.
performance.
No, it didn't take away, but it was something that,
Yeah.
the other thing was that last night, I got to attend a BOU presentation on healthy relationships and consent. They discussed what parents and teachers need to know and share about consent. They talked about, does it feel like butterflies or moths in your stomach? You know, butterflies being good, and I'm not sure, but, you know, and the moths being, yeah, I don't really want this. How to identify red flags, safety planning, conversation starters at home with your children. This was presented by Carly Young and Jessica Van Wormer, and the work that they are doing in healthy relationships and consent, I think, is life-changing. And I would highly recommend that the board have a presentation on this, and I mentioned it to Jody, I understand that's now in the planning, but I was blown away by the quality of what they handed to parents last night. It was just wonderful. I wish we had it when our kids were in school, and I would encourage all of you to get, not only see what they're doing, but take a look at the books that BOU actually gave out, books on different subjects, all related. And one of them was Raising a Feminist Son. And I just was, I love that because often men are excluded from this in a positive way, and this was a positive inclusion, and I thought that that was very positive for the entire community. So it's something I'd like to see happen. I may not be here when it happens, but I think it's something the board should see.
John, then do you know if the presentation was recorded and is available for parents who maybe would be interested but were not?
It was done
Sometimes they do
live,
that.
and I don't know, I don't think it was recorded.
Okay.
But I can find out and let you know.
I was just going to ask the same question, or at least what are some of the reference materials that they had that they can share with us? And they
the
might
re-
have it just from being here at school.
The
so
reference materials, I know are available, and I'm sure that I can contact Cindy and she can get them to Holly to distribute.
Sure.
Thank you for going to that. I wanted to go to it, and I just couldn't get there with work. So I'm glad that one of us was able to go and see what the presentation was like.
Okay. I didn't hear a word of that. I may be getting old, but I don't think I'm that old.
Thank you for going. I'm happy that somebody from the board was there to get that information and share it with us.
It was a mic placement issue.
It was a mic.
Catherine, I think you had something you wanted to
I
share.
did, yeah. I just wanted to give a shout out and thanks to the folks. We had some parents organize a nature's classroom trip this year for fifth graders across the different schools. That wasn't something that was able to, to happen because a lot of the planning had to happen in advance, and we didn't know COVID and so on and so forth. But it was pulled together, and I think went off really, really well. And I can't wait to see what can come of this in future years, because I know it's been a beloved program for fifth graders for a really long time in the district.
Anybody else? All right. Next are our student reports. Do we have anyone from the high school or the middle school? I think we do have someone here from Ellesmere. If you would like to come up to the microphone.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me here. My name is Brooke Vielkind, and I'm a fifth grader from Ellesmere Elementary, and I just wanted to talk about some of the things our school is doing. So I talked to all the teachers at my school and from each grade, and they all had something that their kids wanted to definitely say about their school year. So our kindergartners are really loving the fifth grade buddy program and are so glad that it started up again, and COVID has been allowing us to meet together. And then our first graders, I know they have grown some caterpillars, and they may or may not have hatched into butterflies yet. I do not know, but that should be soon, and they should release them. And then our second graders, I know they've really been working hard and been working on interacting with each other and getting ready for the years to come. Then our third graders recently just took for the first time the New York State math test, which I know is very difficult, and I think they handled it really well. Our fourth graders just finished their colonial unit, where they researched a colonial job, and they wrote a help wanted sign with real ink and quills, to the best of their abilities, of course, to demonstrate what they learned about their profession. And then our fifth graders have had so many fun things. One of them was the Potato Olympics, where we each got to choose a potato, and they competed in all these different events. And then, like someone else said, in the Nature's Classroom, I knew a lot of kids who went there, including myself. So that was so fun. And I hope the school can organize it next year, so more kids can go. And yeah, we have a lot of upcoming events, and I think I heard that we're hoping field day will be an all-day thing. And again, with the fifth graders, we're hoping for Survivor Day, fingers crossed, which would be at the town park. And yeah, we have so much coming up. We have, I think, 39 days left of school. And 26 will be devoted to the ABC Countdown. So that's really fun.
Thanks so much for sharing all that. Was there something in particular that you enjoyed about Nature's Classroom?
Well, I really liked the way it was set up. Like, kids got to choose their own paths and got to choose what they did and what they learned and how they grew. So that was really fun.
Great, thank you.
I have one question. How did you memorize all of that for tonight? Because that was very impressive. Great
Thank
job.
you. I don't know.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Does she get a pin?
Yes, but I don't have any. We do have a pin for you, and we'll make sure it gets to you. Okay. Next is our presentation tonight, and it is a bell time review.
Okay. I wanted to recircle back to bell times. We've had this discussion a couple different times this year, and we paused the eligibility because really the two do make a difference on eligibility and bell times. So I want to go through 3 different models that we've looked at. We have talked with the staff about some options. These are very similar to what we had looked at prior. So I want to just talk a little bit about why we need to look at bell times, or why we're looking at again, I should say. So in 2018, we convened a committee to examine the high school start time. The outcome, or the goal, was to move the high school start time to 8 o'clock or as close to that time as we could. The recommendation at the time that we talked about from the American Academy of Pediatrics, I believe, was 8:30. And logistically, we could not get there without impacting the entire district significantly. So our goal at that time was to move the high school start time to 8 o'clock, which we did for 1 year. The middle and elementary times were not changed. In order to get the 8 o'clock start time, though, what we did is we moved from a 3-tier system to a 2-tier system in transportation, where middle and high school essentially began at the same time, but we still maintained primarily separate routes for high school and middle school, with exception of a few routes that were farther out. There were a couple combined routes. However, this is not a surprise. We have a significant driver shortage, which you've heard much about this year, and we realized that we could no longer support the 2-tier system because that requires a significant increased number of drivers. And Catherine, I saw you had sent something about the number we would need to get there. So when this committee was convened in 2018 at that time, we had about 89 drivers. We don't need 89 drivers to go back to a 2-tier system because we did create a lot of route efficiencies. We made some changes with our rider capacity. We would need probably around 75 drivers, maybe 76 or so, minimally, to move back to a 2-tier system. So with the current driver shortage, we can't support that system, so we need to plan on moving and operating on a 3-tier system for the time being. So unless we miraculously get 20 more drivers, I don't see that happening anytime in the near future. So to look at some different models, which you've seen something similar to this, and again, some of the minutes might be adjusted, but the current model, referred to as Model A, keeps the high school beginning early, around 7:20. So, the beginning of the instructional day would be around 7:30. The end would be just after 2 o'clock with a 2:15 departure time. Middle school would stay around 8 o'clock, 8:15-ish. And the elementary would pretty much be unchanged. I do want to say that I think it's important to note that the reason our time varies is because our elementary instructional day is shorter than our middle school day and our high school day, and our middle school day is the longest instructional day. And not only are there day requirements with state ed, we're required to have minimally 180 instructional days for state aid reimbursement. There also are minute requirements for each of the levels, which we have to adhere to, otherwise we lose state aid as well. So the easiest solution would obviously be everyone goes the same length of the day, and it works out perfect, but that just isn't the case. Also within these models, we built in 45 minutes minimally turnaround time for transportation, because that's what transportation needs between the different levels to get the buses to the schools, get the students home, and get them back to the next tier for transportation. So you'll see in some of these there's 45 minutes. In some cases there's more than 45 minutes just because of the way that the student day is structured. So this is the model we could continue with. The next model, Model B, begins the middle school earliest at 7:20, around 7:30. It moves the high school to about an 8:15 start, or the buses would arrive just after 8, and elementary would primarily remain unchanged. So there's a little bit of change there in the teacher workday, but the one issue that we talked about in 2018 with the committee was putting the middle school first. Basically, the research shows having high school kids start later is better for their overall health and well-being. Middle school students, particularly 8th graders, are not much different than 9th graders. So are we putting the middle school first to create a problem for the middle school students by making the high school start later? So that was just one thing I think should be pointed out, that was a discussion the committee had, which is essentially why the goal was to have the two-tier system where both levels begin around 8 o'clock. And the next model, Model C, I'll just be very honest, is not a very popular model at all, particularly because the middle school, you will see, starts so late and their day ends late. And the biggest impact, you can see elementary going first. This was a big discussion with the committee back in 2018, is 2 o'clock is a very early end to an elementary day. Potentially some kids would be in aftercare for a significant amount of time. But particularly with the middle school starting that late, you're then dependent on the extra help time. Club activities would probably have to be before school, and that would be dependent on parents being able to get their children to the middle school to get that extra help or participate in activities. And it would, the challenge, but I think it could be worked around because other middle schools do start later, is athletics, which that's a late time for fall activities, athletics particularly as the season gets later, and early spring activities. But again, the athletic piece could be adjusted, and that could be something we could work around. But I think the clubs and extra help would be a challenge, having them in the morning. So that is probably, I would say, just in general, from feedback, the least popular model, and I don't think would work very well. So some of the next steps we need to consider is for board discussion about those three options. This does have contractual implications, so it would require the BCTA to review this, and also it would require a vote of its members for any contractual change that impacts their workday. So that would require a vote, and the goal would be, if we are making a change to move the levels, we would want to plan that, begin planning that now, announce it in the fall. So staff obviously have time to make adjustments, families have time to make adjustments, particularly with childcare, before or after school care, and some of the changes that would be required. It would also obviously require transportation to make changes in their planning for routing for the fall, for the following year. So that's pretty much the summary of the bell time options. So I'll open it up for questions or discussion about those options that people have.
Option C, it sounds like the teachers wouldn't be in support of that, so.
I would say that's an accurate statement.
So we're looking more for Model A and Model B because it would be a bargaining issue.
Yeah, and I just think they're so, with Model C, with the middle school starting that late, I think it does a lot of disservice to middle school students for the extra help in club activities, and it just ends very late. So I don't see that being acceptable to the teachers, and I think a lot of parents would have a very difficult time saying my child can only get extra help pretty much if I can get them there before school starts,
And it
or
also
participate in club activities.
disrupts 3 levels.
It disrupts 3 levels, that's
and
correct.
versus the 2.
Is there a reason in Model C we couldn't flip middle school and high school?
To start high school at 9, 10?
Model C,
Model C, yeah.
So say that again, Willow?
keep elementary first, but then flip middle school and high school? Is there a reason that doesn't work?
You couldn't.
You could never have high school end that late with after-school activities.
right.
And work, like jobs and.
Actually, that might be, if we did that, that would probably be the most unpopular model, I would think. Versus this one, or, yeah.
I do appreciate the comments about, what's different between an 8th grader starting early and a high schooler starting early when you've got they're not too far removed in terms of the age range. I think a difference that I would point out is that your 7th and 8th graders are not driving themselves to school. And that is a concern that has come up with our high school students starting so early. The ones that are driving, that's some of the research that has come out has said that that's one of the areas of concern, having really tired kids on the road. And I think there is also something to be said for the academic piece of it at the middle school. Is naturally going to be less rigorous than for your high school students. And also, I mean, at the end of the day, if we're looking at either Model A or B, somebody is going to have to be there early. So if we're looking at either, is it going to be your 6th, 7th, and 8th graders or your 9th through 12th graders? To me, it seems like it, and this is going to be a very unpopular decision in my own house, but it seems to me like it would make more sense to have the middle schoolers start earlier.
And I think just piggybacking off of your points there, it's not great to have, all the studies show that as the kids get into, as humans, not just, right, as humans get into the teenage years, earlier isn't as great. And so the 8th graders are heading in that direction, as are some 7th graders. However, we would be asking them to do this for a finite period of time. By the time they get to high school, then we're shifting them a little bit later. So that also kind of makes me feel a little bit better about Model B. And I totally agree, keeping tired high schoolers off the road is another benefit of Model B. And I think that, I think that none of these are good. I mean, just to say that, and we've had this discussion before, but just just for posterity, this is not a decision that I want to make. I want to have a 2-tier system that starts middle and high school later. However, facing the realities that we face in the bus driver shortage, and knowing that there are no good decisions, or it's a hard decision here, and it's possibly not great for a lot of people, Model B is definitely where I would lean.
I would agree that Model B seems to be where we need to land. My concern is that as things change, and hopefully if the bus driver situation in particular, which seems to be driving most of this, if that were to improve, would we be in a situation, say, mid-year at some point, where we might be able to change the times to benefit all of the students, or are we really locked in for a year when we make this decision?
I think it would be very difficult to change the entire transportation routing system in mid-year. So I think that hopefully we will see some increases in our driver recruitment, but we need to add a significant amount of drivers. I like your hopeful thinking. I don't see that happening next year. But I think that if we committed to that time for the fall, and if it were to pass with the union, we would need to stick with that for the year. And if we were able to, we saw a nice increase in our drivers, we would probably make the change the following year. We'd have to go back to the 2-tier system.
So basically, we're making the decision for a year.
Correct.
And would revisit it, depending on the circumstances, a year from now.
Correct. Although, just keep in mind that if we are going to move forward with a change like Model B, it does require the union to have a vote and it to pass. And so if then a year from now we wanted to now change the middle school back to another time, I'd have to check, but I think that would require then another vote, because now we're changing the workday again.
And staff are making arrangements for childcare, so it's not something I think we should take lightly for just a year. Should
Right.
the bus shortage, I mean, I think we should definitely make it like a couple of years or a few years and then revisit it if that were the case. The thing that I'm concerned with Model B, and I definitely support the start school later, is the high schooler academic ninth period when the majority of our student body plays sports at some point. Where are they getting that help period? And are we going to see an academic decline with this model?
Well, we had the high school starting at 8 o'clock.
In the 2021 school year.
What year was it?
20,
2019?
Last
20
year.
Well, this is
Seems
last
so
year.
long ago.
We only had it a year. Do we
No,
have a year or
it
no?
was post-COVID.
We had,
was
we
the
had,
start.
yes,
So it
we
was
had it.
20 to 21.
And there was still an afternoon help time that students could go to, and we just asked coaches to start their practices after that time. There are some times where, for example, if student athletes are going to Saratoga, they may have to leave early just because of the travel time, but generally, they're still able to access after-school time.
So was the first year a COVID year?
Yes.
Yeah.
And
It was
so
the fall
were
of
any of
20
those
to the spring of
sports
21.
canceled? Did we see any problems with athletics?
No.
Well, they had moved the schedules
Yeah.
around.
Yeah, the
Yeah,
other
we-
thing that we did is we actually shortened the period length.
Right, by a
So the
minute.
day ended at 2:15.
Right.
So the extra help period still ended by 3.
Right.
But we can no longer do that because the instructional minutes that are now required, as opposed to the 180-day requirement, that wouldn't work.
Right.
So that's why this has to end at 2:50 as opposed to 2:15.
So they would
that
be
we
losing.
We would not be able to have that same model that you're speaking of, right?
Right, we would have to figure that out.
Because if we're just having that ninth period in the morning, is it just defeating the whole purpose? And then we're still changing the schedule? Because I would really hate to see the rigor of high schoolers, especially with mental health issues that are in the news. And I had mentioned to you today about where my son goes to school, there's been 3 suicides in less than 6 months.
Right.
And I know the academics here at the high school level can be very rigorous, and a lot of those kids play sports. And to not have that extra help period is only going to increase that anxiety. And I would really hate to see us get into an environment where we created something not good for the kids.
Right, so Dave's right, the instructional minutes time, we were, is a struggle at the high school because of that. So we would have to adjust the periods by a minute or so and figure out what to do with homeroom. So the after-school time would be shorter than it had been in the past. They might only have 15 or 20 minutes to see a teacher, or the morning time would be the option.
I'm going to be honest, I'm going to probably be the person who's the outlier on this, but just for that alone, I could not support changing to Model B, because I think there will be a lot of repercussions from that. That extra half an hour is going to be nothing if they are stressed out of their mind because they can't get a math teacher to help them with pre-calc. And, I've had 3 kids go through the high school. I know my kids got after-school help. I know kids before sports got after-school help. And I think that should be a focus point before we make that decision.
Is there, sorry, it's a different issue, so if we're not done talking about that. Yeah.
Why can't we just move the sports up a little bit if you feel like you need more after-school time?
It's not that, it's the teacher contractual day is a 7.5-hour day. And the way the schedule works with the student day is they have to have a certain number of minutes per day. With the high school, you can't count, excluded from the time requirements that the state allows, you can't count transition time. So one of the things we would probably have to look at is reducing transition time. So for example, students have 5 minutes to get between classes. In order to be able to meet the requirements and still give some after-school time, we would probably have to reduce the transition times to 3 or 4 minutes, which kids would have to rush to get to class, which was talked about during the committee meeting. We would probably have to not have a homeroom or do what we do now where it's 5 minutes built in. Students' lunch is also excluded from the state calculation. So if students have a lunch, which is partly, when I talked about the student day, the middle school, even though they have the longest day, we're actually the shortest on minutes because homeroom didn't count, lunch doesn't count, transition time doesn't count. In elementary, lunch and recess does not count for state requirements for minutes, which I think is ridiculous since students actually need to eat lunch during the day. So at the high school, we have some benefit in that about half of our student population doesn't take a lunch, so we can count half of those minutes. It's crazy. So when you think about how would we give those kids some times, we're reducing transition time to gain 5 or 10 minutes a day, or you're not having a homeroom in there. Could you give those students probably 20 minutes and still meet the state requirement for minutes? You probably can, but are they going to have a half hour like they did before, 40 minutes? No, or we
Not even
won't
close.
meet the state requirements.
Even if a teacher stays later, which I know
Yeah.
a lot of them do.
Right. That's not
Daylight is a problem for sports in the fall, especially, that we would see a problem with it.
And I'm sorry, it's just because I'm not, I have not had kids in high school, so I'm not following this as embodied as other people are here. What is the push point at the end of the day if we were to? So I'm sorry, that's just what I'm not understanding. I'm missing something here.
7:20 was
I'm sorry.
when, 7:20, the buses would start coming. When was the bell time?
Say 7:30, just for
7:30, and then there's 8 periods. and then
42-minute periods, I think they are. And
From
then
2:10 to 3 o'clock, there was a 9th period where students can get help before sports start at 3
it's
o'clock.
when club activities meet.
So there's almost 50
period,
minutes.
That period does not count, even though it's part of the teacher workday, and it's part of the student day in regards to their opportunity to get extra help or participate in clubs. It's not a period that's eligible for the state calculation in the minutes. So in order to gain that time, you have to take it from somewhere else, which you get into transition time, homeroom time, lunch, all those things.
So under Model B, if we can flip back to that one. With the high school ending at 2:50, that 9th period would be from,
We could show you a period schedule in an example like this, but in order to get, say, 20, 25 minutes maybe, you'd have to reduce transition time. That would be the only way to get it, or reduce class time. Instead of 42 minutes, maybe it's 41 minutes.
because of the length of the teacher workday.
No, because of the length the state requires for the student instructional day. There's really nothing to do with the teacher workday.
Okay.
Did they increase it? Like, I'm
Yes.
trying to figure out where we lost all those minutes.
The state never had minute requirements until a few years ago. And they put them in, they put 900 minutes in for elementary, and it's 990 for grades 7 through 12.
Wait, now I'm confused though, because if the day is starting later and ending later, like why aren't we just adding on after 2:50?
Okay, so the issue is when the state made this change, then COVID happened.
Yep.
We had waivers for the minute requirements, so we didn't have to meet the minute requirements. So when we were revisiting this, Bruce Turek, who does our state reporting, in the submission, brought it to our attention that we would not be, if the minute requirements were in effect, we would not be meeting them for the high school and the middle school based on.
Even under our, if nothing changes with our bell times, like
Correct.
right now, we're not
Correct.
meeting them.
Correct.
So
Jody,
what will
But
we
that's
do?
almost
So
a
what do
separate
we do?
issue from the start
No,
time. right?
it's not really, because with the work we've done with the buildings, we have models now that work and give us time for if we have snow days, for example. Because if you have snow days, you lose that time as well. So it's set, but when you change the bell times, you have to make sure you're meeting the minute requirements. So in the high school and, like I said, the middle school, we have to look at all those components, which in order to get this time, we have to shorten something else, which could mean class time or transition time for the high school, because that's really all that's available at that level.
So would you have to get a contractual agreement for the end of the instruction day to go past 2:50? Because before you were starting at 7:30 and ending at 2:10.
Right.
Is it a problem
no.
with the end time?
No, the teachers, you have two different things. There's the teacher workday, which is 7.5 hours, and there's a student instructional day. They're two different things. But yes, the teacher workday at the high school is 7:30 to 3 o'clock. So if there's a change, which there probably would be, right? The teachers would have to vote. Or at the middle school, their day is 8 to 3:30 currently, so that would be a change. That's different than the student instructional day.
So if you were comparing Model A and Model B, it's going to be the same amount of time from beginning to end?
For the teacher workday is the same amount of time.
AM bus arrival to the end of the instruction day, is that the same on both models, like time-wise?
The student day is the same
Yeah.
on the models. Correct. And don't get so, I guess what I would say is don't get so locked into these particular minutes because, you can adjust those a minute here, a minute there, 5 minutes, but generally this is what the day would look like.
But to Christine's point about the extra help time and stuff, is there, and combining that with your point about not getting hung up on specific times, is there a way to bump even by 10 minutes under Model B, the end of the high school day, so that we're still giving some additional time for that? Or would we then have to bump the elementary school pickup? Could we work that consideration in to preserve the high school extra help time while still
So right
keeping
now-
all the other plates spinning?
So no, you can't, for example, you can't take the high school and say their instructional days ending at 3 o'clock, move the PM bus departure to 3:10, and keep the elementary the same because now you're taking away the turnaround time that transportation needs.
Right, we'd have to add 10 minutes onto that as well. And I think that's what I'm asking. Can we add, can you add 10 minutes, 10
So now
minutes
you
to get
have
that
to take the
in?
elementary and move the start of the day later and the end of the day later.
Could we just add 15 minutes?
Yeah, that's
to
what I'm
the
asking.
Elementary school
No,
students' day?
no, because now you're impacting the contractual planning time that teachers get.
Right.
So they have the teachers have 7.5 hours.
But they also
we-
have contractual planning time
Okay.
built in. So if you're saying, let's just add 10 or 15 minutes to the instructional day, particularly in elementary school, that means they're with the teacher for that instructional time, and you're taking away their planning time.
Okay. Sorry, and just to be clear
Yeah.
too, I'm not trying to be like, let's
No, no, no,
just.
no,
I
I
know
know.
there is no let's just. I understand that. I'm just trying to think through.
It's all.
I'm trying
it's
to
a
make sure I
domino-
understand.
Yeah, it's a domino effect. You're trying to stay with 45 minutes for transition time.
Yes.
45 minutes minimum. Obviously, a little more is works, although sometimes with so much time, some of the bus drivers end up waiting around. You also have then the after-school club and extra help time for the middle and high school that needs to be factored in. And you have the teacher workday and their planning time, which all has to be factored into it as well. So you can't just say, well, let's add 5 minutes to this day or 10 minutes. It just doesn't work without creating another potential issue.
Thank you. I think I was asking wait, why wouldn't
Yeah.
that work? though?
We
But
add
I'm not.
a 15-minute recess to the end of elementary school so that it doesn't take away from instructional time or planning time?
Yeah, but who's going to monitor the kids during that
The aides that are there
recess?
waiting for school's out
Well, or give them an extra 15 minutes at lunchtime.
You can't because you can't give them 15 minutes, otherwise kids will have to start eating at 10 o'clock in the morning and they won't end till 3 o'clock in the afternoon.
My question on Model B was actually about middle school end time and whether or not I'm the only one that's concerned about adding an extra hour in the middle of the afternoon where middle schoolers have nothing to do. I mean, I'm being
No,
serious if that's a consideration that I'm making up in my head, but particularly for sixth graders who the year before would be in an after-school program and are now just like hanging out.
right. And there are obviously some club activities for them, but there's not really sports activities for them. So it is definitely, I think there would definitely be some parents who have that concern. I think it's legitimate.
Dave, I'd love to get your opinion on reducing the after-school help time at the high school.
Yeah, I don't know, well, so let me just clarify maybe a little bit too in terms of, so the teacher day right now is 7:30 to 3. Student day ends at 2:15 essentially, so that leaves 45 minutes. In this model, high school, teacher day would be 8 to 3:30. So best case scenario, 3 to 3:30 would be the extra help
Right.
time. So you're
Yeah.
cutting it down 15 minutes, best case scenario. So that's kind of, and then the elementary piece, they have the longest student day. So that's where it becomes very, very tricky. But even this model doesn't quite work because the teacher workday for elementary, you're
Currently.
pushing the ends. Like if you started at 9, their day ends at 3:30. Or, yeah,
No.
9 to 3:30.
They're, right now, they're 8 to 3:30.
Right, so if they did
So it was
9 to
4.
you're going to be not being able to have teachers there for either the beginning bus run or the late bus run because it's going to be like simultaneously teacher
Well,
day beginning or ending.
The elementary.
So that's another challenge.
The elementary teacher day would need to move to 8:30 and go back 8:30 to 4.
Right.
Right.
So, but
But back to the high school
Yeah.
help time, they're playing
So I made-
sports, a lot of them.
right. So when I was back on the Start School Later committee, that was one of the concerns that I raised was that the after school period is highly utilized here at the high school.
Highly.
And it's not just athletes too. That's when we run the clubs. That's when musical practices. That's when like a lot of extra after school activities begin at 3, and that gave students that solid 45 minutes to work with teachers. And then students that had jobs still had time for extra help. If they needed to leave, they were still able to get to jobs for say 4 o'clock start times. So I don't know.
Time to eat and do homework
Right.
before
This is
sports.
reducing, this would basically reduce it by at least 15 minutes, maybe 20 minutes.
So
For what they have.
I was in favor of the 2-tier system because that worked for both levels. But I think even looking back, if you look back at the committee minutes, the reason that the high school time was moved was because it worked within a 2-tier system.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't believe that committee, at least most of the folks that I sat at the table with, would have voted in favor of Model B because even listening to the students at those sessions, the after-school time was sacred to those students. So we were able to make that after-school time still work with the 8 o'clock start. So that was sort of the agreement was that, okay, this will work within a 2-tier system, but the majority of the students and the teachers and parents that I was working with throughout that committee work I don't believe they would have voted in favor of this model, having the middle school go first and high school go second because of the after-school time.
Yeah.
Yeah, the after-school time, I agree. That was a big discussion.
And I also,
and sports was a big discussion,
yeah.
but after we got past kind of that we could work with the sports, I think that's really became less of an issue. It was, to Dave's point, the after-school clubs and extra help that
But
was.
but just to be clear, like, so they would still have the time, it would just go until 3:30?
No, well,
It-
at best
well,
it
it'd be
would be,
shorter
at best it
time.
would be half an hour, but now, so now you're also asking, so clubs only have 30 minutes now to get all of their work done. You're also saying, okay, so after-school activities can't start till 3:30, which now, it doesn't sound like a big deal, but now 3:30, if they used to run 3 to 4, now it's 3:30 to 4:30. So students that potentially used to work or so forth, that extra half an hour, I know some students talked about, they need to be leaving, like, they're very much able to stay here from 3 to 4 for extra curricular activities, but at 4 o'clock they needed to leave to get somewhere for, say, 4:30, and now when you're starting to push that towards 5, even later, they said that would not appeal to them.
So yes, there would be an after-school time, but it would be shorter than it is now.
And not everybody would be able to participate with sports.
So that's the other thing is, depending on how we're able to arrange, and this is
Right.
a larger discussion, I guess, depending on how accommodating other schools are with adjusting start times, it's not always possible because of field
Exactly.
conditions, right? Not everybody has lights, not everybody has multiple fields, so if they're trying to play freshman, JV, and varsity on only, say, 2 fields, they can't adjust times.
And
say,
the kids are gonna
so
have
we'd
to
have
leave
students leaving
earlier.
early before the day ended.
Yes, so they're going to be leaving that last
That's-
period
that's
to
true.
go
Particularly
to.
in the fall is probably the most
Yeah.
challenging time for that.
I don't see how this model is feasible for those students. I don't see it. And The other thing is they had that mental downtime. A lot of these kids are taking 8 classes. They don't take a lunch. And that break period between the end of the day and when they start sports is necessary to refuel, to eat. Some of them do a little bit of homework, so they're not up till 1 a.m. doing homework when they get home. I just think we're going to see a lot of issues with this if we go to that model.
Do you think it only worked the last year because it was a COVID year?
No, I think it worked because it was a two-tier system. It didn't matter, I mean, that's
Because
really.
there were-
And we didn't.
No,
have
last
a-
year it was one
We didn't have a
tier.
lot of kids riding the
Or-
bus anyway.
No, well,
Because we were
but-
going half and half.
But putting the middle school piece of it aside,
Yeah.
like at the high school, right, like there wasn't, because they were starting at what, 8 o'clock?
8 o'clock.
Last year?
Yep,
So it was like a 15-minute difference.
yeah,
And still ending at 2:50?
yeah, yes, I believe so. I
So
have
it
to
was
go
8
back
to
and look at.
2:50 instead of 8:15 to 2:50.
I have to go back and look
Or
at. the
There was a
specific
lot of
schedule.
virtual help, though. It was a lot of virtual help if they needed it. And it
Well,
was
we
like
only
every
had,
other day,
we only
too.
had we only had half the kids
Yeah.
here. Think
That's why
about it.
I'm like,
But
because it seemed like it worked, but.
But it worked,
Is that
if we had had
because-
everyone here, it still would have worked because the two-tier system. Because like I said, the kids who were further out, transportation did a dual pickup, so they dropped off the kids here, then went to the middle school. Yeah. And we still would have had to make a few adjustments with the timing, with the probably transition time or something, or homeroom for the minute piece, but this, when you build in, you have to have 45 minutes between them is what puts some significant restrictions on it.
And that's not, what do we have this year between the bus runs?
The biggest challenge we have is between the middle school and elementary. I think we have 30 to 35 minutes, and it's a big problem.
And what's between the high school and the middle school this year?
Well, we dropped, so realistically, it's probably 30 to 35 minutes, but the buses drop off early at the high school and then go.
I'm just wondering whether, like, what would Model B look like if we didn't need to have a firm stick with that 45-minute turnaround time?
We do. But Model B?
Model B.
Yeah, like if it had to be 40 minutes.
Like if it
or-
were 40 minutes or 35, like, is there any wiggle room in there is kind of what I'm asking.
If I asked Karim, he would say no.
I know what Karim would say.
But we made it work this year.
I think,
With less
well, we
time.
haven't really made it work that well. I think that you could maybe have a little wiggle room when you're talking about between middle school and high school, but when you get into transitions with middle school and elementary, there are just a lot of kids that take the bus there, and that's a lot of different routes. They're transporting to 5 different elementary schools, plus, private,
But with this
parochial.
model, the between middle school and elementary wouldn't, like, they're not back to back,
To be
so-
honest, I wouldn't be comfortable saying, yeah, we have
Sure.
wiggle room.
No, I hear you. I think it's something to think about, whether that, with this model,
I don't see how we support this model. I mean, it looks good on paper, but in theory, I don't see how that works with the high schoolers.
what happens with the late buses if we went with this?
Well, right now, the late buses at the high school don't even come till 4 o'clock, I think, so we have a ton of kids waiting who need the bus. Because that's the earliest we could get any drivers back here for late buses, so it's going to depend, to be honest, what the late buses will depend on how many drivers we have to do the late buses. So ideally, we would want the late buses to come 45 minutes or so after at the end of the instructional day, after the extra help time. But right now, we don't have the ability to do that. So they come at 4 o'clock, 4:15 or something like that at the high school. So depending on what our driver situation was, would depend on when we could actually get late buses to the buildings. So I can't really say what that would be. But ideally, we would have them with 45 minutes or so after the end of the day.
When do you need a decision on this by?
I mean, if you would like, what we could do is we could actually put together, if it's helpful for you at all, to see kind of a period schedule with the after-school time built in with these two different models, so you can see what the actual changes are in order to actually meet the minute requirements. I don't know if that's all that helpful, or does it really matter?
Would the only,
Or what's the sacrifice, I guess, in order to make that happen?
that would be, I mean, for me, again, having not lived this, that would be helpful, and then that would be helpful, I think.
But we'd have to see the sports impact. I think you can see it, and you can put the periods, and you can put the end time, and you can see all the numbers, but you aren't going to actually see the impact of students not being able to stay due to sports. And how many kids do we have playing sports? Like 1,000?
Well, I think you would see it, I mean, I would find it helpful to have a period schedule to see what ninth period would look like, and then if you then kind of impose on top of that, all right, so say ninth period looks like it would go from 2:50 to 3:30, but sports start at 3 o'clock. Like and so anybody who's involved with that then misses that piece.
And what are we doing with the middle school kids who are playing sports and can't start to 3? Are they coming over here and hanging out?
Sure, Dave Domel would like that.
Well, that goes back to the late bus thing too. So if the late bus, right now, we have high school students waiting around for quite a while for the late bus. So you potentially could have middle school students waiting from 2:15 to 4:15 for a late bus. So they're just hanging out at the middle school for 2 hours waiting for a late. So that's another area
At
that needs
middle
to be.
school or
Middle school.
That's middle school. If you went with this model. So right now, high school students, their after-school period ends at 3. The bus doesn't show up till 4:15-ish.
Right.
So let's say 4:15 is kind of the magic late bus time. Under this model, middle school ends at 2:15. So if the late bus can't show up till 4:15, what do they do for 2 hours? I'm not saying it's not something
That
you
sounds
can't
like a
handle, but
recipe
a plan would need to be in
That's a
place.
possibility.
It's a possibility.
Possible.
Right.
Though this year, I mean, the middle school late bus seems to run when
Yeah, because it's later.
because it's later.
Yeah, it works, okay.
And that's less unsupervised time, less time to get in trouble.
Because you can't run a late bus at 3 because that's when the high school
Right.
main departure is, and then
saying.
you have another elementary departure at 3:45.
3:45. So they come after the elementary.
Right.
The
The
late
shortest
buses are
elementary
basically the
runs.
elementary runs. That's why they come at 4 to 4:15 here.
So if they're playing sports and they don't start till 3, so do we have a bus taking them from the middle school to here for varsity sports? I mean, we do have kids who play varsity who's supervising them till sports starts, because high school is still in class, so it's not the coaches if they're teaching.
Yeah, we'd have to figure that out.
Yeah. The more, yeah, I think when you provide the times, just, Dave, if you can add a little bit about, like, looking at who's watching middle schoolers till they leave.
Oh, Dave said he would watch the middle schoolers.
Did you?
In the
Awesome.
in the cafeteria here. I'm sure the high school kids would really appreciate that. But no, we can certainly map out, here's a middle school schedule, period schedule with this, and here's a high school with the minutes we need for the state. And you can see, like, for example, in order to gain the after-school time, if we have to cut down on transition time, we'll note that. If you have to cut down on class time, note that. And then what are the, changes that need to be made in order to, I'm not sure Model A really needs that, because Model A is what we have now, so we know that at least that works.
Well,
If you-
Jody, if you did provide that to us, what we have currently, I think it would be a good visualization to
Yes.
compare the two.
Okay,
Thank you, yeah, a side by
Especially when
side.
Okay.
I'm trying to figure out what's happening with period 9.
yep,
If we could
Thank you.
see what we have now and kind of lay out what happens in period 9,
okay.
then we could compare the two.
Good
But I don't
comment.
think we need to worry about Model C, because that seems like it's a non-starter.
Yeah, I would
The
agree.
other,
No,
the
I
other
think-
question I have is, I thought we weren't going to change the times for fall of '22.
So
Just
when,
announce.
so this would
would
be
announce.
for, right, this is not for next year.
Right,
So for
this
next
is-
year, we're going to stay with Model A, roughly what we currently have. This would be if we make a change, because it would require a vote. The vote would probably, I don't think it would happen, well, maybe it would happen this spring, either the spring or early fall. And so we would begin planning for the fall of 2023 with a change.
Jody, when you have that vote, is it possible to have that vote as a contingency vote so that the board has the option to go back if they can't, if the fall comes and you can't do the schedule that you've had them vote on for whatever reason, that you can revert to what you have now?
I don't know, I'd have to, that would be depending on what the BCTA has in their bylaws.
I think it's something that you should look into, because if you could end up voting for something you can't do.
True.
And if that happens, you want an out. And I'm sure they're going to want an out as well. So it's something I would encourage you to look into.
Okay, yep, good point.
Thank you.
Is that
So as I was saying, nobody wants to do this.
it? No, I would agree with that.
Yeah, thank you.
All right,
Yeah.
thanks.
Next is recognition of public comment on an agenda item. If we have anyone who would like to address the board on an agenda item, now would be the time. It's very empty here today. Item 6, action items. A, finance action items. It is recommended by the superintendent that the Board of Education approve the following finance action items 1 through 4.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? That passes. B, professional personnel action items. It is recommended by the superintendent that the Board of Education approve the following professional personnel action items 1 through 4.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion?
I would like to thank Joanne Menrath for all that she's done, especially for my daughter during certain years. She's been a real pleasure to have in the district, and she will be missed.
Thank you, Jonathan. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? That passes. C, support personnel action items. It is recommended by the superintendent that the Board of Education approve the following support staff action items 1 through 6.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? That passes. D, other action items. It is recommended by the superintendent that the Board of Education approve the following action item 1.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? That passes. E, the Capital Region BOCES Board Member Election for 2022. It is recommended that the Board of Education vote on items 1 through 4 separately to elect up to 4 candidates on the ballot for board members of Capital Region BOCES. So we need to vote on each one individually. So starting with the first one.
Do we have to do them separately?
No.
We used to do
I
them.
think we can do
time we
all
have to
four
do it separately.
candidates.
We did if
at
they're
once,
unopposed.
But then
I
we have
think
to.
last year we
do the
did, since there's
budget
only
separately.
4
Yeah.
candidates, I feel like last year we voted for all 4 of them at the same time.
Yeah. We have in the past. I'm positive.
Would someone like to make a motion to do so?
I'll make a motion to join all 4 in one vote.
What?
Christine has made a motion to,
Why
for
is
us
my
to
mic-
vote on all 4 candidates
As a slate.
as a slate and elect them to the board members of the Capital Region BOCES.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? That passes. Okay.
Now you have to vote for the candidates. You just voted for.
Oh, we voted for the motion.
Right.
It is recommended that the Board of Education vote for the candidates listed 1 through 4 for the BOCES board member election.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? That passes. Congratulations to those 4 individuals. F,
Budget.
2022, 2023 Capital Region BOCES administrative budget. It is recommended that the Board of Education vote to approve the following administrative budget of the Capital Region BOCES.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any
Nay.
abstention? Any abstentions? That passes. 7, recognition of public comment on a non-agenda item. At this time, if we have any visitors on a non-agenda item who would like to address the board, please come forward. Item 8, future meetings and events. On Wednesday, May 4th, next week, we have our next board meeting, and that will at 7 o'clock, anticipating executive session at 6. That will also include our hearing on the budget. On Monday, May 9th at 6 o'clock, we have a policy committee meeting. On Wednesday, May 11th at 6:30, we have the Meet the Candidates Night. And Jody, just to clarify, is that going to be by Zoom, the Meet the Candidates Night?
It is going to be Zoom. Yep.
Okay. On Tuesday, May 17th, from 7 a.m. to 9 p.m., we have our annual budget vote and election here at the high school in the gym. And then on Wednesday, May 18th at 7 o'clock, we have our board meeting after that. And then we have anticipating executive session at 6 o'clock. Seeing no need to go back into executive session, may I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Meeting adjourned.
I'm always so loud. I don't understand.